The battle was over before it even began. Deep in the void of space, on the outer edges of the Xiphos system, the fleets of the galactic concordance hovered in uneasy silence. Hundreds of warships, each belonging to a different faction, formed a vast blockade around a single vessel. They had come from every corner of the galaxy, battle-hardened armadas of the Vathari Dominion, the insectoid hive fleets of the Chuxa Swarm, the sleek warships of the noble Zentari Empire. Even the cold, machine-like warships of the Augur Collective had arrived, their AI minds calculating endless battle probabilities. All of them had one shared goal: to destroy the warship that should not exist. At the center of it all, floating alone in the vastness of space, was the UNS Behemoth. A ship that defied reason, a ship that terrified the galaxy. "Multiple enemy formations detected, Captain," said Lieutenant Vale, her voice steady despite the tension on the bridge. The main viewport showed the endless lines of enemy ships, their weapons primed, ready to fire. "We're surrounded." Captain Elias Thorne sat in his command chair, one leg crossed over the other, fingers tapping the armrest. He looked completely at ease, almost bored. "Of course we are," he murmured. "We knew this was coming." The UNS Behemoth was not a warship in the traditional sense. It was a message, a declaration. It was the culmination of Earth's desperate struggle to survive in a galaxy that saw humanity as weak, as insignificant. For centuries, humanity had been ignored, outmatched, dismissed by the greater civilizations of the stars. But Earth had not remained idle. No, they had prepared. And now humanity had unveiled its final warning to the galaxy. The Behemoth was the single most powerful warship ever built. It was larger than a dreadnought, more advanced than any flagship, and possessed technology that defied conventional physics. To the Concordance, its very existence was an act of war. "Enemy fleet commanders are hailing us," said Vale, turning toward Thorne. "Let them speak." The viewscreen flickered, and the image of High Warlord Excrit, Supreme Commander of the Vathari Dominion, appeared. His reptilian features twisted into a sneer. "Human," he spat, his forked tongue flickering. "You have built an abomination, a weapon that violates every treaty of war." Thorne tilted his head, unimpressed. "Oh? And why is that, exactly?" "The Concordance has ruled that no single vessel should have the power to disrupt galactic stability," Excrit growled. "Your Behemoth is a crime against nature." Thorne chuckled. "Funny. I seem to recall that the Concordance didn't care much for stability when you let entire human colonies burn." Excrit's expression darkened. "And now," Thorne continued, "you're all scared. Because for the first time, humanity is no longer at your mercy." He leaned forward, his voice cold. "You want me to surrender the Behemoth? You want me to power it down and hand it over?" He shook his head. "Not gonna happen." The warlord bared his fangs. "Then you leave us no choice. The Concordance will end this threat before it begins." The transmission cut off. An eerie silence settled over the bridge. Then the enemy fleet moved. Hundreds of warships ignited their engines, their formations shifting, weapons locking onto the lone human vessel. The sheer firepower aimed at the Behemoth was enough to reduce a planet to dust. "Captain," Vale said, "they're preparing to fire." Thorne exhaled slowly. Then he stood, stretching his arms. "Well, they can try." He turned toward his weapons officer. "Activate the overdrive core," he ordered. "Let's show them what a real warship can do." The moment the overdrive core activated, the Behemoth came alive. A deep hum vibrated through the ship's structure, a sound that sent shivers down the spines of every crew member. The bridge lights dimmed, replaced by a soft crimson glow as the ship shifted into combat mode. Outside, in the cold void of space, the enemy fleet moved like a tidal wave of destruction. Hundreds of warships, each armed with the deadliest technology the galaxy had ever known, now bore down on a single target. But they had no idea what they were dealing with. "Enemy fleet has locked weapons," Lieutenant Vale reported, her fingers dancing over the holographic controls. "They're about to fire." Captain Elias Thorne remained calm, his gaze fixed on the viewport. "Let them." And then, the void exploded with light. The Concordance fleet unleashed their fury. Thousands of plasma cannons, railguns, and antimatter torpedoes were fired simultaneously. Energy beams cut across the blackness of space, converging on the behemoth like a storm of death. Any normal warship would have been vaporized in an instant. But the behemoth was no normal warship. The ship's hull, a composite of human ingenuity and stolen alien technology, shimmered as it absorbed the incoming fire. Kinetic rounds struck, but instead of tearing through the armor, they dissolved into nothing. Plasma bolts fizzled against the ship's energy field, and even the most devastating antimatter torpedoes detonated harmlessly against its shields. On the enemy command ships, panic erupted. What is happening?" Xcrit roared aboard his flagship, watching as the behemoth remained untouched. "It's absorbing our fire," one of his officers yelled. Xcrit's claws dug into the metal railing. "Impossible! Nothing can withstand that level of bombardment!" But the humans had done the impossible. Back on the behemoth, Captain Thorne let a small smirk cross his lips. "All systems at full capacity?" Vale checked the readings. "Shields holding at 98%. Armor integrity is untouched." Thorne rolled his shoulders. "Good." Then he turned to the weapons officer. "My turn." A single command was given. "Fire." The behemoth retaliated. Unlike the Concordance fleet, which relied on numbers and overwhelming firepower, the behemoth had no need for excess. It fired only 3 shots. 3. The first was a Hyperion lance, a beam of pure energy so condensed that it pierced straight through the heart of the enemy formation, cutting through ships as if they were paper. The blast left behind a burning wound in space, debris and vaporized remnants of ships scattering in all directions. The second shot was an electromagnetic disruptor, designed not to destroy, but to disable. A pulse of crackling blue energy surged outward, washing over the enemy fleet like a tsunami. Every non-human ship within range suffered catastrophic system failures. Engines died, shields collapsed, weapons went offline. Ships drifted helplessly, their crews screaming into dead calms. The third and final shot was the most devastating of all. Graviton implosion warheads. Each one created a miniature black hole upon detonation, crushing nearby ships into oblivion. The vacuum left behind swallowed dozens of vessels, pulling them into the abyss before vanishing. In mere seconds, the massive Concordance fleet was no longer an armada. It was wreckage. Silence filled the behemoth's bridge. Vale's voice was quiet. "Captain, we just took down over half their fleet." Thorne sighed, almost disappointed. "I thought they'd last longer." On the enemy side, what remained of the Concordance fleet was in chaos. Commanders screamed orders, desperately trying to retreat. Warships scrambled to escape, but the battlefield was littered with debris and collapsing space-time distortions from the Graviton warheads. Xcrit, once filled with arrogance, now sat frozen on his bridge, his eyes wide with horror. "This," he whispered, "this is not war. This is annihilation." The UNS Behemoth didn't chase the fleeing survivors. It didn't need to. The message had been sent. Humanity was done being weak. Humanity had built a monster, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Across the battered battlefield, the remains of the once mighty Concordance fleet floated lifelessly. Wreckage spun aimlessly in the void, fires still raging in the husks of broken warships. What had begun as an overwhelming force to erase the behemoth had ended in a massacre, the kind of defeat that would be spoken of in hushed voices for centuries to come. Yet Captain Elias Thorne felt no triumph. He stood at the center of the behemoth's bridge, hands clasped behind his back, watching the devastation unfold on the main viewport. His crew had fallen silent, staring in awe and unease at what they had just done. For all its power, the behemoth was not a weapon of conquest. It was a warning. And yet the way those enemy ships had been torn apart, it felt less like a warning and more like an execution. Lieutenant Vale finally broke the silence. "Survivors are retreating, Captain. They won't be back." Thorne nodded, exhaling slowly. "Good. We made our point." But had they? Had they really? Or had they just made things worse? "Captain," another officer called out, urgency in his tone. "We're receiving a transmission. Priority 1, encrypted. It's coming from—" He hesitated, his throat tightening. "It's coming from Earth." Thorne turned sharply. "Put it through." The viewscreen shifted, revealing the grim face of Fleet Admiral Helena Carter, Supreme Commander of the Terran Defense Force. Her silvered hair was tied back tightly, and her sharp, piercing gaze held none of the usual warmth. She looked past Thorne, surveying the ruined battlefield behind him. Then she spoke. "Captain Thorne, you just shattered the Concordance's pride in less than 5 minutes." Her voice was steady, but there was a weight behind it, something ominous. "Do you understand what you've done?" Thorne didn't flinch. "I did what had to be done." Carter's expression remained unreadable. "And now the entire galaxy is going to do what they think has to be done." Thorne's jaw tightened. "They attacked first. They always would have." She leaned forward slightly. "But this was something else. You didn't just win, Captain. You changed the entire power structure of the galaxy in an instant. You made every species out there realize that humans aren't just another race to push around." She took a deep breath, then continued. "And now they'll unite like never before to destroy us." Silence. Thorne felt his crew shift uncomfortably. They had all expected this, hadn't they? But hearing it from the highest-ranking officer in the fleet made it real. Vale spoke up hesitantly. "Admiral, with all due respect, if they couldn't stop us before, how can they stop us now?" Carter's lips pressed into a thin line. "They won't fight you head-on anymore. They know they can't. But there are other ways to win wars." Thorne frowned. "What are you saying?" The Admiral leaned back, her expression grim. "The Concordance just called an emergency summit. Every major faction, even those who hate each other, are coming together, and the first thing on their agenda is a formal declaration." Thorne felt his stomach tighten. "They're calling for a total ban on humanity's war technology. Every human military ship is now considered a galactic crime. And the behemoth? The moment you show up anywhere, every single fleet in the galaxy is authorized to destroy you on sight." Thorne clenched his fists. "They're trying to erase us." Carter nodded. "Yes, and it gets worse." She turned slightly, as if looking at another screen. "We just intercepted a coded transmission from an unknown source. We don't know who sent it, but it's spreading like wildfire across every major faction." She looked back at Thorne. The message was simple. Humanity must be stopped, by any means necessary. Thorne's eyes darkened. He had expected retaliation. He had expected political backlash. But this wasn't just about banning the behemoth. This was about the extermination of humanity itself. "They're not just banning our ships," Thorne muttered, his voice cold. They're making us the enemy of the entire galaxy. Carter's face was like stone. You have two choices, Captain. 1. Disengage, disappear, and go into hiding. The behemoth is too powerful to be destroyed, but if you keep using it, we'll be facing an alliance of every species out there. Earth can't win a war against the entire galaxy. Thorne's voice was a whisper. And the other choice? Carter hesitated. Then, with a steely gaze, she said, You start the war first, before they do. The bridge was silent. No one spoke. No one breathed. Thorne felt the weight of history settling onto his shoulders. He turned back toward the viewport, staring at the scattered remains of what had once been an armada. The galaxy had wanted to erase humanity, and now they had given humanity no choice. Thorne closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. When he opened them, his decision was made. He turned toward his crew. We set a course, he said, his voice calm, steady. Not to run. His eyes burned with a fire that no alien species could extinguish, but to remind the galaxy why they should have feared us in the first place. The behemoth moved through the void of space like a ghost, silent and unstoppable. No force in the galaxy could match its raw power, but Captain Elias Thorne knew brute strength wouldn't win this war. The galaxy had already united against them. If humanity wanted to survive, they would have to be smarter than their enemies. Navigation, report, Thorne ordered, his voice carrying through the bridge like steel. Lieutenant Vale's fingers danced over the controls. We're en route to Outpost 46 in the Tau Perseus sector. No hostile activity detected yet, but long-range sensors are picking up unusual subspace traffic. The Concordance is moving. Thorne folded his arms. Of course, they were. After the massacre at Xiphos, the Concordance had lost its taste for direct confrontations. They wouldn't risk another battle against the behemoth. They were too afraid. But fear made enemies desperate, and desperate enemies always found new ways to strike. Admiral Carter warned us about this, Vale said. They won't attack us head-on. They'll try to cut us off from supplies, sabotage our networks, turn our own people against us. Thorne nodded. That's why we're heading to Outpost 46. We need information. If we don't get ahead of their plans, we'll be fighting a war we've already lost. A flicker of hesitation crossed Vale's face. Captain, what if Earth is already compromised? What if... The bridge alarms blared before she could finish. Proximity alert, another officer shouted. Something just dropped out of FTL. Multiple signatures. Thorne turned sharply toward the viewport. Outside, the darkness of space rippled as ships materialized from hyperspace. But these were not warships. These were prison ships. A cold chill ran through the bridge. The behemoth hurtled through space, its engines burning brighter than ever before. It was no longer just a warship. It was a symbol, a beacon of defiance, a reminder to every human still out there that the fight wasn't over. On the bridge, Captain Elias Thorne stood with his hands resting on the control panel, his mind racing through possibilities. They had set a course for Eos Prime, one of humanity's most fortified colonies. If there was any place still willing to resist the Concordance, it would be there. But would it be enough? Status report, Thorne ordered. Vale checked her console. We're 5 hours out from Eos Prime. No hostile activity detected on long-range sensors. She hesitated. But we're picking up a high-frequency distress signal. Human in origin. Thorne's eyes narrowed. Source? Vale pressed a few buttons. It's coming from a nearby debris field. Looks like a battlefield from an old conflict. Signal is weak, but it's repeating. A distress beacon. A remnant of humanity's shattered fleets, calling out into the void, hoping someone, anyone, was still listening. Thorne clenched his jaw. Can you identify the ship? Vale ran a scan. Negative, but if it's still transmitting, someone might be alive. A murmur spread through the bridge. Everyone knew the risks. It could be a trap, a concordance lure designed to bait them into an ambush. But it could also be survivors, soldiers, engineers, people who could help them. Thorn made his decision. "Bring us in," he said. "Weapons at the ready. If it's a trap, we'll deal with it." The behemoth changed course, gliding toward the wreckage. As they drew closer, the devastation became clearer. It was an old battlefield, maybe a year or two old. Dozens of human warships ripped apart, their remains scattered like broken bones, and in the middle of it, floating in the ruins, was the source of the distress signal. A single Terran battlecruiser, the Vanguard. Thorn inhaled sharply. He knew that name. The Vanguard had been one of the last ships defending Earth before the embargo. Officially, it had been declared lost with all hands. But here it was, barely intact, and still calling for help. "Life signs?" Thorn asked. Vale's hands moved quickly over her console. "Faint, but yes, I'm detecting human survivors aboard, not many." Thorn's expression darkened. "Get me a boarding team. If there's anyone left alive on that ship, we're bringing them home." Minutes later, Thorn stepped onto the boarding shuttle with a squad of Marines. His pulse was steady, his thoughts focused. He had seen too many battlefields, too much death, to let fear cloud his judgment. The shuttle crossed the void and docked against the Vanguard's shattered hull. With a hiss, the airlock opened. Darkness greeted them. The interior of the ship was a graveyard. Flickering emergency lights cast eerie shadows across the corridors. Bodies, human bodies, floated in zero gravity, their faces frozen in terror. The ship had been gutted, its systems failing, its crew abandoned. And yet, someone had survived. The distress beacon had still been broadcasting. "Stay sharp," Thorn murmured, raising his rifle. The Marines followed close behind. They moved through the corridors in silence, searching, scanning for life. Then, movement. A faint sound. Thorn turned a corner and raised his rifle, and then he saw them. A small group of survivors, huddled in the remains of the command deck. Malnourished, exhausted but alive. Their uniforms were tattered, their faces pale. One of them, a woman barely able to stand, looked up as Thorn approached. She blinked as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Are you real?" she whispered. Thorn knelt beside her. "Yeah," he said. "We're real." Tears welled in her eyes. We thought no one was coming." Thorn glanced at the others. Less than a dozen. Out of a crew of hundreds, only these few had survived. He exhaled, his heart heavy. "Not anymore," he said softly. "You're safe now." But deep down, he knew. None of them were truly safe. Not yet. Not until humanity had taken back what was theirs. The survivors of the Vanguard were in rough shape. Malnourished, dehydrated, and barely able to move, they looked more like ghosts than soldiers. But they were alive. That was enough. Captain Thorn stood in the shattered command deck of the ruined battlecruiser, his Marines securing the area. His eyes flicked across the consoles, most of them shattered and useless. The ship was beyond saving. Even if they had the resources to repair it, the Vanguard was a dead hulk. But its crew still had a purpose. "Get them back to the shuttle," Thorn ordered. "We're done here." His Marines began helping the survivors, leading them toward the docking bay. As they moved, the woman who had first spoken, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Lorne, lingered behind, staring at a shattered monitor. Thorn noticed. "Something on your mind, Commander?" She turned toward him, hesitation in her tired eyes. "Before the attack, we intercepted something." Thorn narrowed his gaze. What kind of something? Lorne swallowed. A transmission. It was encoded, but we cracked part of it. The Concordance wasn't just planning to isolate Earth. They were planning something bigger. Thorne felt his chest tighten. Bigger how? Lorne hesitated. A weapon. We don't know what kind. But we do know this. If they finish it, humanity won't just lose the war. Her voice dropped to a whisper. We'll cease to exist. A cold silence filled the room. Thorne clenched his fists. Do you still have the data? Lorne nodded weakly. It's in the ship's black box, but... She looked around at the ruined bridge. Power's dead. We couldn't access it. Thorne activated his comm. Vale, I need a retrieval team here now. We're pulling the Vanguard's black box. Vale's voice crackled through the link. Understood. Sending a team. Thorne turned back to Lorne. We get that data, and we find out what they're planning. Lorne nodded. If we still have time. Back on the Behemoth, the survivors were given medical attention. Thorne stood outside the infirmary, his arms crossed, deep in thought. Vale approached, datapad in hand. We got the black box. Thorne's head snapped toward her. And? She exhaled. The data's damaged, but we pulled enough. The Concordance is building something called Project Dominion. Thorne frowned. That name doesn't tell me anything. Vale's face was pale. It's not just a weapon, Captain. It's worse. She hesitated, then continued. They're engineering a biological failsafe, a species-specific virus designed to target humans. If they finish it... She swallowed hard. They won't need to fight us anymore. They'll wipe us out without ever firing another shot. Thorne's blood ran cold. The Concordance wasn't planning a war. They were planning genocide. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of the revelation hung heavy in the air. Then, slowly, Thorne exhaled. They just made the worst mistake of their lives. Vale nodded. What's the call, Captain? Thorne turned towards the viewport, staring out at the endless black of space. Set a course, he said, his voice like steel. We find that facility. We burn it to the ground. And then, in a voice colder than death itself, he added, and we show the galaxy what happens when you try to erase humanity. The Behemoth turned, engines roaring. The hunt had begun. The Behemoth surged through the void, engines burning hot. Time was no longer a luxury. The Concordance's Project Dominion wasn't just another war machine. It was the endgame. If they completed the virus, humanity wouldn't have a war to fight. They'd simply vanish, wiped out by a weapon they'd never even see coming. Captain Elias Thorne stood at the center of the bridge, his expression hard as stone. Around him, his crew moved with purpose, understanding the gravity of their mission. Vale, he said, do we have a location on the facility? Vale tapped at her console. We cross-referenced the data from the Vanguard's black box with known Concordance research sites. There's only one match, an uncharted moon in the Orion Veil. She pulled up a holo display, revealing a barren, icy rock with deep underground structures. It's not on any official star maps. Looks like the Concordance has been keeping this place a secret. Thorne studied the image. Defenses? Vale's face darkened. Heavy. Orbital weapon platforms, automated turrets, and at least 2 Concordance fleets stationed nearby. We're looking at a full-scale fortress. A low whistle came from one of the officers. They really don't want anyone getting near that place. Thorne clenched his jaw. Then we're breaking in. A murmur spread through the bridge. A direct assault would be suicide, even for the Behemoth. One ship, no matter how powerful, couldn't just bulldoze through an entire star fortress. Vale hesitated. Sir, even with our firepower, we'd be walking into a meat grinder. Thorne nodded. Which is why we're not going in alone. Vale blinked. You have a plan? Thorn turned, eyes burning with determination. We need allies. It's time to gather every last human who still has the guts to fight. The behemoth changed course, heading for Eos Prime. The colony was one of the last human strongholds, its people fiercely loyal to the old Terran defense force. If there was any place where humanity still had fight left, it was there. But as the behemoth approached, something was wrong. Picking up multiple energy signatures, Vale said, her fingers flying over the console. Captain, Eos Prime is under siege. Thorn's gut twisted. Show me. The view screen shifted, revealing the nightmare unfolding below. The Concordance had arrived first. The skies above Eos Prime burned as human resistance fighters clashed with enemy warships. The colony's defense grid was still active, but barely. Ground forces were locked in brutal combat, and from the looks of it, the humans were losing. Thorn exhaled slowly. They knew we'd come here. They wanted to break the last of us before we could rise. Vale turned to him, waiting for the order. Thorn's expression didn't waver. All hands to battle stations. The behemoth descended like a hammer from the heavens. As soon as it entered the battle, the tide shifted. The first enemy warship exploded in a burst of fire as the behemoth fired a single Hyperion lance, cutting through its hull like paper. The second ship tried to retreat, but it was too slow. 3 railgun rounds punched through its engines, sending it spiraling into the colony's atmosphere. The remaining Concordance forces scrambled, but it was too late. Thorn turned to his weapons officer. Deploy the Hellfire drones. Wipe out anything that isn't human. Swarms of autonomous attack drones erupted from the behemoth, streaking through space with terrifying precision. Enemy ships fell apart in seconds, their defenses useless against the relentless assault. On the ground, resistance fighters stared in shock as the sky filled with fire. They had thought the battle was lost. Then they saw it. The behemoth. Hope returned in an instant. Ragged fighters picked up their weapons, rallying under the sight of the warship that had defied the galaxy. The battle reignited, but this time, the humans fought like demons, pushing back the invaders with renewed fury. Within an hour, the tide had completely turned. By the time the dust settled, Eos Prime was still standing, and the Concordance had been driven from its surface. Thorn stood before a gathered crowd of resistance fighters, soldiers, pilots, engineers, men and women who had thought they were alone in the fight. He looked at them, his voice steady and cold. The Concordance tried to wipe us out. They took Earth. They stole our future. And now they think they've won. His eyes swept across the room. But they made a mistake. They thought humanity would kneel. Silence. Then he stepped forward. I don't plan to survive this war, he said, his voice carrying through the hall. I plan to win it. The crowd stirred. I'm not here to beg for scraps. I'm not here to hide in the dark while they erase our existence. His gaze hardened. I'm here to burn their empire to the ground. A murmur spread through the crowd. The broken soldiers of humanity, those who had lost everything, felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. Rage and purpose. Thorn turned toward the holo projector, displaying the target, the Concordance's hidden facility. They're building a weapon to end us, he said. We take that facility. We take our future back. Silence. Then, someone in the back shouted. For Earth, another voice. For Earth. The room erupted. For the first time in years, humanity wasn't just surviving. They were about to fight back, and the galaxy would never forget what was coming. The war for humanity's survival had begun. The Resistance Fleet, once a scattered collection of battered warships and desperate soldiers, was now a growing force, fueled by rage and determination. The behemoth led the charge, its presence alone enough to rally humans from every corner of the galaxy. Colonies that had once cowered in fear were now rising. Ships that had been abandoned were being repaired. But time was running out. The Concordance's Project Dominion was nearing completion. If they launched their bioweapon, every human world, every last man, woman, and child would be wiped from existence. And so there was only one path left: destroy the facility, or die trying. The fleet gathered on the outskirts of the Orion Veil, just beyond sensor range of the Concordance research station. On the bridge of the behemoth, Captain Elias Thorne stood with his officers, reviewing the battle plan. Vale pulled up a holomap of the enemy stronghold. "This isn't just a research facility, Captain. It's a fortress, 3 orbital defense stations, a full fleet of Concordance warships, and planetary shields strong enough to withstand orbital bombardment." One of the officers swore under his breath. "It's a death trap." Thorne's expression didn't change. "Then we don't fight them the way they expect." He tapped a control panel, changing the display. "The behemoth will engage the enemy fleet head-on, will draw their fire, force them to commit all their resources to stopping us." He turned to Lorne, the newly rescued officer from the Vanguard. "You and a strike team will infiltrate the facility while they're distracted. Find Project Dominion and destroy it." Lorne nodded, eyes burning with determination. "You can count on us." Vale frowned. "And if this is a trap, what if they're expecting us?" Thorne's voice was cold. "Then we kill them all." A long silence settled over the room. Then, one by one, the officers nodded. No more running, no more hiding. This was the final stand. "Battle stations," Thorne ordered. "We end this tonight." The behemoth burst from hyperspace like a vengeful god. The Concordance fleet scrambled, caught off guard. Warnings and panicked transmissions flooded enemy comms as their ships moved into defensive formations. Thorne leaned forward in his command chair. "Open fire!" The behemoth unleashed hell. Railguns roared, Hyperion lances tore through enemy warships like paper, and pulse cannons shattered entire formations in seconds. Concordance vessels returned fire, but it was like throwing stones at a hurricane. On the surface of the research station, alarms blared. Enemy soldiers rushed to defensive positions as Lorne and her strike team landed, moving with lethal precision. "We're in," Lorne radioed, "moving toward the central lab." Thorne barely heard her. His focus was on the battle unfolding in space. The behemoth was holding its ground, but the enemy was adapting. More warships poured in from hyperspace, surrounding them. "We can't hold this position forever," Vale warned. Thorne didn't flinch. "We don't have to. We just need to buy Lorne enough time." Deep inside the facility, Lorne's team fought through Concordance soldiers, cutting them down with ruthless efficiency. Then, they found it. The bioweapon. A massive containment chamber stood before them, filled with a swirling, sickly green mist. The virus that would erase humanity. Lorne planted the charges. "Package is set. 5 minutes until detonation." She turned to leave, and came face to face with a Concordance commander. The alien sneered. "You think you can stop what's coming?" Lorne didn't hesitate. She raised her weapon and fired. The commander dropped. She sprinted for the exit. "Captain, we're clear!" On the behemoth, Thorne exhaled. "Get out of there." The behemoth fought like a cornered beast, tearing through enemy ships even as more surrounded it. But it didn't need to win. It just needed to survive. "Lorne's team is airborne," Vale called out. Thorne turned toward the viewport. In the distance, a small craft shot out of the atmosphere, heading straight for them. Right behind it, a massive explosion. The research facility erupted in a fireball, shockwaves ripping through the planet below. The virus, the weapon, the last hope of the Concordance to erase humanity. Gone. For the first time, the Concordance fleet hesitated, and Thorne knew what had to happen next. He activated the comms. All ships, full assault, no survivors. The human fleet surged forward, striking the Concordance forces while they were reeling. What had started as a suicide mission turned into a slaughter. One by one, the enemy ships fell, until nothing remained. The battle was over. Thorne stood on the bridge, staring at the wreckage of the Concordance fleet. A voice crackled through the comms. It was Lorne. "It's done. Humanity is safe." Thorne exhaled slowly. They had won. But this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. He turned to Vale. "Send a message to the Concordance. Tell them exactly what happened here." Vale hesitated. "And what should we say?" Thorne's eyes were cold. "Tell them Earth is coming." The galaxy had tried to erase humanity. Now, humanity would make them regret it. Forever. The war had raged for 20 cycles. To the Galactic Dominion, the battle was already won. The remains of the once mighty Krivath defense fleet floated lifeless in the void, their shattered hulls a testament to the Dominion's overwhelming force. The war was over in all but name. Admiral Vokran of the Dominion fleet stood on the bridge of his flagship, inexorable, watching the destruction unfold. The Kriveth homeworld, a blue-green jewel named Tarsus IV, burned beneath him. Fires raged across its continents, its once proud cities reduced to smoldering ruins. What little resistance remained would be swept aside within the hour. Vokran turned his golden eyes toward the main view screen, where his fleet's warships moved with mechanical precision, executing the final annihilation of the Krivath species. They had fought well, for a lesser race. But they had never stood a chance against the might of the Dominion. A comms officer turned to him, her posture rigid. "Admiral, we have intercepted a transmission from the Kriveth command bunker. They are attempting to call for outside assistance." Vokran let out a deep, guttural chuckle. "From whom?" "Their allies are dead, their forces broken. Who would dare intervene against us now?" The officer hesitated, then swallowed hard. "It's a distress call directed towards humans." Silence fell over the bridge. Then, a ripple of uneasy murmurs spread through the crew. Vokran's chuckle faded. Humans. They were a minor species, a backwater civilization from the Orion Spur, technologically primitive, militarily insignificant. Yet, despite their irrelevance, there was something about them that set even the Dominion's warriors on edge. Their history was one of relentless expansion, of wars fought against impossible odds, and won. But this was different. Even humans had limits. Tarsus IV was light years beyond their reach, and no sane commander would challenge the Dominion for a dying world. Vokran waved a dismissive hand. "Let them scream for help. No one is coming. Finish the bombardment." The order was acknowledged, and the Dominion fleet resumed its final act of extermination. Plasma lances rained down upon the surface, reducing entire districts to rubble. The cries of the Krivath filled the Dominion's comm channels, pleas, threats, and final words lost in the firestorm. And then, it happened. A tear opened in space, directly above the battlefield. A breach in reality itself. It crackled with energy, warping light and distorting gravity. The entire Dominion fleet halted as every sensor, every scanner, and every mind on the bridge focused on the impossible event unfolding before them. And then, it arrived. A single warship, emerging from the void. Human. But not just any human vessel. The Leviathan. It was unlike anything Vokran had ever seen. Massive, Black as a singularity, its armor plating shimmered with an eerie, predatory gleam. The ship bore no unnecessary ornamentation, no insignia, just a name etched into its hull in crude, angular letters, HSV Behemoth. For the first time in his long, blood-soaked career, Admiral Vokren felt something foreign slither down his spine. Fear. The bridge was silent. Every Dominion officer stared in disbelief as their scanners reeled in confusion. The human ship defied classification. Its power readings fluctuated in ways that should have been impossible. Its weapon systems were locked, primed, and calculating targeting solutions with terrifying efficiency. A deep, rumbling voice echoed across the comms, transmitted in perfect Dominion standard. "This is Commander Elias Kane of the human sovereign vessel Behemoth." There was a pause, a deliberate one, a moment designed to let the Dominion realize exactly what they were dealing with. "Cease your bombardment, withdraw your fleet, or be destroyed." Vokren's claws gripped the armrests of his command chair. The audacity, the sheer arrogance of these creatures. A single ship against the might of the Dominion's entire fleet? He bared his fangs in amusement. Foolish creatures. Humans might have been persistent, but they were not invincible. "Fire on the human vessel," he ordered. "Show them the price of—" The Behemoth moved. Not like any warship should move. It didn't drift, didn't adjust course with predictable thruster burns. It lunged as though it were a living thing. One moment it was beyond visual range, the next it was among them. And then the Dominion fleet died. It began with a single flash, a weapon unlike anything ever seen, not plasma, not kinetic, something worse. The Dominion battleship Indomitable, a vessel with armor thick enough to withstand the core of a dying star, ceased to exist in an instant. No explosion, no debris, just erased from the void. Panic erupted across the bridge. Officers scrambled to make sense of what they were seeing. A pause. Then, Kane leaned forward, his voice dropping to a quiet, dangerous tone. "Now you will see why humans don't lose wars." Vokren's blood ran cold. The Behemoth's weapons came to life, and the slaughter began. Admiral Vokren had witnessed death in many forms. He had seen warships torn apart by railgun slugs the size of buildings, planets burned to lifeless husks, and cities vaporized under the crushing force of Dominion bombardments. But this was something else. The HSV Behemoth didn't just destroy Dominion warships, it unmade them. The battlefield became a graveyard in the blink of an eye. The Behemoth's weapons activated. Except they weren't like anything the Dominion had ever encountered. There was no visible beam of energy, no roaring cannon fire. Instead, the space around each targeted warship twisted. And then, without so much as an explosion, they vanished. The Vindicator, gone. The Relentless, gone. The Eternal Wrath, a battlecruiser that had survived 100 wars, reduced to nothingness. Vokren's mind reeled. He had never seen a weapon like this. It wasn't kinetic. It wasn't energy-based. It was something deeper, something terrifyingly efficient. A comms officer screamed, his hands gripping his console. "Admiral, the Behemoth isn't firing conventional weapons. They're using localized space-time distortions to erase ships from existence." Vokren turned, his fangs bared. "Explain." The officer's face was drenched in sweat. "They're manipulating reality itself. Our warships aren't being destroyed in the traditional sense. They're being removed from causality, like they never existed." Vokren's claws dug into the armrest of his command chair. This was beyond anything the Dominion had prepared for. His fleet was dying, and they had no way to fight back. More ships disappeared, their entire existence erased by the Behemoth's attacks. Within minutes, nearly half of the once invincible Dominion armada was simply gone. "This is madness," whispered one of his bridge officers, watching in stunned silence as the behemoth advanced, gliding through the battlefield like a predator among prey. But Vokren wasn't done yet. He was Dominion. He would not let his fleet perish without a fight. "All remaining warships," he roared, his voice shaking the bridge. "Concentrate fire on the behemoth! Give them everything we have!" The survivors obeyed. The Dominion fleet let loose a final, desperate volley. Thousands of energy lances, kinetic shells, and warheads surged toward the behemoth in a last-ditch effort to bring it down. The sheer volume of firepower could have shattered a moon, could have burned an entire world to glass. And yet, not a single shot found its mark. The behemoth's defenses were beyond comprehension. Every projectile bent away, curving into empty space as if the laws of physics themselves refused to let it be harmed. Dominion warheads detonated before reaching their target, as if space itself rejected their presence. For the first time in his life, Admiral Vokren truly understood what it meant to be powerless. A harsh beep echoed across the bridge. The human commander's voice returned over the comms. "Your fleet is broken. You have no more options." Vokren refused to accept it. "You think a single ship can end the Dominion? You think you're—" Kane cut him off. "Your species believes itself to be invincible. You think war is something you control, something you dictate on your own terms. You burn planets. You exterminate civilizations." The human's voice lowered. "But you have never fought humanity. You have only fought those who could not fight back." Vokren snarled, fury and desperation mingling in his chest. "You are still just one ship. You cannot destroy an empire." A brief silence. And then, Kane laughed, not mockingly, not arrogantly, but in a way that sent a chill through every officer on the bridge. "You think we're alone?" Kane said, voice dripping with amusement. Vokren's blood turned to ice. A new alarm screamed through the bridge. Something was coming. "Admiral!" The sensor officer's voice cracked with fear. "Multiple FTL signatures inbound, hundreds, no, thousands of human warships." And then, the stars themselves seemed to shatter. One by one, the void erupted with white-hot breaches in space-time. And out of those breaches came the human fleet. Colossal dreadnoughts, each nearly the size of a Dominion battleship. Swift and lethal cruisers, their hulls reflecting the light of dying stars. Monstrous war machines, each one carrying enough firepower to erase a world. The United Terran Navy had arrived. It wasn't just a battle anymore, it was a reckoning. Admiral Vokren, the proud warrior of the Dominion, watched in absolute horror as the full might of humanity descended upon them. And for the first time in his life, he understood. The Dominion was doomed. Admiral Vokren had faced impossible odds before. He had led Dominion fleets against entire star empires, crushed rebellions that had festered for centuries, and watched planets burn under his command. But nothing had prepared him for this. The human fleet had arrived, and the battlefield would never be the same again. "Incoming vessels now at 10,000 and rising," a sensor officer choked out, his voice trembling. "They're emerging from slipspace fractures, but their drive signatures are unlike anything we've ever seen." The Dominion fleet was already in disarray, their forces decimated by the behemoth's impossible weaponry. But now they faced a storm of human warships, descending upon them like the vengeance of the cosmos itself. Vokren stared at the armada unfolding before his eyes. Hundreds, no, thousands of human vessels poured into the void, forming a wall of destruction. Their formations were tight, disciplined, not the ragged disorganization of a desperate force. This was not an improvised rescue mission. This was an extermination. On his bridge, Dominion officers murmured in dread. The Terrans had been considered a minor power, an upstart species barely worthy of notice. And yet, here they were, unleashing a fleet of warships bigger, faster, and more advanced than anything the Dominion had encountered before. "Impossible," Vokren whispered, his throat dry. A new voice came through the comms, another human, a woman this time. Her tone was calm, measured, but filled with an edge of cold steel. "This is Admiral Catherine Caldwell of the United Terran Navy. As of this moment, your fleet is in violation of Terran sector security protocols. You have engaged in genocide. You have committed war crimes against non-combatants. There will be no negotiations." A pause. And then, in a voice that sent a shiver through Vokren's bones, she spoke the words that sealed the Dominion's fate. "You do not surrender to us. You are simply erased." A moment of silence fell over the battlefield. Then, the slaughter began. The Terran warships opened fire, and the Dominion paid the price for their arrogance. It started with the dreadnoughts, their weapons unlike anything the Dominion had ever seen. Pulse lances of destabilized matter tore through Dominion shields as if they were paper, ripping entire capital ships in half. Destroyers moved like predators, their weapons firing with inhuman precision, slicing apart the last vestiges of Dominion formations. Cruisers deployed swarms of autonomous drones, each one a miniature warship in its own right, darting through Dominion lines and shredding anything in their path. Then came the behemoth. It had not stopped its hunt. Now moving through the battlefield like a reaper, it unmade ships with every pulse of its terrifying weapons. A Dominion battlecruiser attempted to flee, only for a rift to open in space before it. The ship never emerged on the other side. One by one, the Dominion's greatest warships vanished, their very existence erased from history itself. Panic tore through the Dominion fleet. "This is madness!" one of Vokren's officers screamed. "We have to retreat! We cannot fight this!" Vokren knew it too. His entire fleet was being annihilated. There was no strategy that could counteract this level of warfare. The Dominion had ruled the stars for centuries, but they had never faced a foe like humanity. His claws tightened. His entire body shook with a rage that could not be contained. "No," he snarled. "We are Dominion. We do not flee. We do not surrender. We fight until the—" And then his flagship shuddered. The entire bridge lurched as the ship was suddenly dragged downward. Emergency klaxons screamed in protest. Officers cried out as gravity buckled. Vokren gripped his console, eyes snapping toward the main view screen. And then he saw it. The behemoth was no longer firing weapons. It had changed tactics. Now it had extended a field of gravitational manipulation, a weapon so advanced, so terrifying, that it had ensnared his entire warship. The Dominion flagship, a vessel the size of a small moon, with armor designed to withstand entire sieges, was being dragged toward the behemoth like an insect caught in a black hole. "Admiral, we're losing control," an officer shouted. They're pulling us in." Vokren's snarl turned into a roar of pure defiance. "No, I will not be taken like this." But it didn't matter. The behemoth's gravity field intensified, and the flagship cracked. Not from external fire, not from some weapon discharge, but from the sheer pressure of reality itself, folding inward. Vokren's body froze as the bulkheads began to crumple. Panels ruptured, entire decks bent inward as the ship buckled under its own weight. It was not an explosion. It was not destruction. It was obliteration. And just before the flagship collapsed into nothingness, Admiral Vokren understood. Humanity had not come to negotiate. Humanity had not come to war. Humanity had come to exterminate. The last thing he heard was Admiral Caldwell's voice, spoken with quiet finality. "This is what happens to tyrants." And then, darkness. The Dominion flagship was gone. And with it, The last remnants of the Dominion's fleet collapsed into ruin. The battle was over. And humanity had won. The battle was over. The Dominion fleet, once an unstoppable force that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, was gone. Where once thousands of warships had dominated the void, now only wreckage and silence remained. The HSV Behemoth and the United Terran Navy had done the unthinkable. They had shattered an empire's war machine in a single engagement. On the bridge of the Behemoth, Commander Elias Kane surveyed the aftermath. The once pristine battlefield was now a debris field of drifting corpses, broken Dominion warships, and the fading echoes of an empire's arrogance. "Tactical report," Kane ordered, his voice level, emotionless. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Mira Vasquez, turned from her console. "Scanning the remains of the Dominion fleet. No functional ships detected. Survivors are minimal. We are detecting some escape pods, but all major warships have been destroyed or erased." "Losses?" Vasquez allowed herself a smirk. "None. Not a single human warship had been lost." Kane exhaled slowly. It was over. But this wasn't just a victory. This was a warning. The Terran fleet had made its debut on the galactic stage, and it had done so with such overwhelming force that the very balance of power had shifted in a single battle. The Dominion was broken, its fleets devastated, its admirals slaughtered. But that was only the beginning, because now the Terran fleet had to decide what came next. "Incoming transmission, sir," Vasquez announced, glancing up from her station. "Admiral Caldwell is requesting secure line communication." Kane gave a nod. "Patch her through." The view screen flickered, revealing the hardened, piercing gaze of Admiral Catherine Caldwell. Her uniform was immaculate, her expression cold and unreadable. "Commander Kane," she said, her voice sharp as a blade. "Mission complete?" "Affirmative," Kane replied. "The Dominion fleet has been neutralized. Their flagship was the last to fall. The enemy leadership is dead." A brief silence. Caldwell's eyes flicked over the wreckage behind him, her expression unchanged. "You understand what happens next, don't you?" she asked. Kane met her gaze. He did. This wasn't just a battle. This wasn't just about defeating the Dominion fleet. This was about sending a message to every power in the galaxy. And that message was simple. Humanity had arrived, and they were not to be challenged. Caldwell leaned forward, her voice lowering to an almost deadly whisper. "We finish what we started." Kane nodded. "Understood." The Terran fleet wasn't just here to repel the Dominion's attack on Tarsus IV. They were here to end the Dominion, permanently. "Orders, Admiral?" Kane asked. Caldwell's eyes gleamed like a wolf's in the dark. "We take the war to them." Kane allowed himself a slow, satisfied breath. The real war was just beginning. The Dominion was crippled, its once mighty fleet shattered, its flagship erased from existence, and its military leadership annihilated in a single engagement. The galaxy had just witnessed the most one-sided massacre in history, and the terrifying truth was undeniable. Humanity was not just another species. They were something far, far worse. And now, they were preparing for the next phase. The United Terran Navy did not retreat. It advanced. Even as the wreckage of the Dominion fleet drifted in silence, the human war machine moved forward, engines burning like funeral pyres in the void. Hundreds of warships, battlecruisers, dreadnoughts, and the ever-looming shadow of the HSV Behemoth began forming attack formations, setting their sights beyond Tarsus IV. Their objective? The Dominion's homeworld. Commander Elias Kane stood at the helm of the Behemoth, his face unreadable as he watched the tactical map update in real time. The Dominion's remaining fleets, those that hadn't participated in the disaster at Tarsus IV, were still scattered across their empire, unaware of what had just happened. But they would know soon enough. And by the time they realized it, it would be far too late. "Admiral Caldwell has given the order," Lieutenant Vasquez announced, her voice filled with a cold sense of finality. "We are to begin Phase 2 immediately." Kane nodded. There had been no hesitation in Caldwell's words. The Terran fleet wasn't going to give the Dominion time to regroup, time to call for allies, time to comprehend what had just happened. This wasn't just a counterattack. This was an extermination campaign. "Prepare a slipspace jump," Kane ordered. "Full fleet deployment. Set course for Dominion Prime." Vasquez grinned. "With pleasure." The palace of the Supreme Archon, ruler of the Dominion, was built into the core of a massive, darkened fortress world. It had stood for over 1,000 years, untouched by war, never even threatened. Until now. The halls of power trembled as reports flooded in from the front lines. Officers and strategists whispered in disbelief, their golden eyes filled with dread. "The fleet! It's gone! No survivors? Impossible. We are the Dominion." At the heart of the chamber, the Supreme Archon sat on his massive throne, his claws digging into the stone armrests. His 4 piercing reptilian eyes scanned the battlefield reports, his mind racing through possibilities. No, this could not be. A single human warship had shattered the Dominion's most powerful armada. And then, an entire Terran fleet arrived, erasing what little remained. This wasn't a battle. This wasn't even a war. This was a reckoning. "Supreme Archon," one of his generals stammered, bowing deeply. "We must begin defensive preparations immediately. We must recall all fleets, fortify the homeworld." The Archon's voice was deathly calm. And what good will that do? Silence. Because deep down, they all knew. The Dominion had spent centuries thinking of humanity as insignificant, a minor species from the Orion Spur, too weak to challenge them, too primitive to be a threat. And that blind arrogance had led them to this moment. They had seen only a fraction of humanity's power. And yet, it had been enough to obliterate their strongest warfleet. What would happen when all of human space mobilized? The answer was horrifying. "Sir!" Another officer rushed into the chamber, panic written across his scaled face. We have just detected a massive slipspace disturbance." The room went dead silent. The Archon turned slowly toward the officer, his breath coming in short, shallow bursts. Not yet. Not so soon." The officer's voice was barely a whisper. "They're here." The throne room shook as Dominion Prime's orbital defense sensors blared warning sirens across the planet. The humans had arrived. And they were not alone. A rift in space split open above the Dominion homeworld. Then another. Then another. The human fleet emerged, cutting through the void like a blade pressed against the throat of an empire. There was no announcement, no warning, no diplomacy. There was only one single chilling transmission, broadcasted across every Dominion channel, directly from the HSV behemoth. Commander Kane's voice was calm, emotionless. "You should have left Tarsus 4 alone." And then, the Terran fleet opened fire. The Dominion homeworld's orbital defenses, massive space stations that had never fired a shot in anger, were torn apart in seconds. Planetary shields, meant to withstand decades of siege warfare, collapsed within minutes. Massive warships descended, their weaponry targeting not just military installations, but command centers, supply lines, and infrastructure. There would be no negotiations. There would be no peace. Humanity had arrived for one reason alone: to erase the Dominion from history. The Supreme Archon stood frozen as his throne world burned. His empire, the most powerful in the known galaxy, was dying before his very eyes. And there was nothing he could do to stop it, because this wasn't a war. It was an extinction. The Dominion homeworld was burning. In the cold vacuum of space, what remained of their once proud orbital defenses were reduced to nothing but drifting wreckage and corpses. The Terran fleet had arrived with one objective, and it was executing that objective without mercy. Human warships descended like reapers, their weapons carving through planetary shields, defensive batteries, and communication hubs. Every command center, every strategic outpost, every military installation, gone within minutes. The Supreme Archon stood in the shattered remnants of his war chamber, his golden eyes wide as he watched his throne world, the very heart of his empire, fall apart. This isn't possible," one of his remaining generals stammered. His scaled hands trembled as he scanned the reports flooding in from every part of the planet. The planetary shield was supposed to withstand a decade of siege warfare. It fell in minutes. The Archon didn't respond. He didn't need to. He knew why. The Dominion had never fought an enemy like this. They had never encountered a species that fought wars with such absolute ruthlessness. This wasn't conquest. This wasn't diplomacy through force. This was annihilation. "Sir," another officer gasped, his voice barely above a whisper. They're targeting civilian infrastructure." The Archon's head snapped toward him. "What?" The officer swallowed hard. "They aren't just hitting military outposts anymore. They're going after supply lines, power plants, industrial centers." A horrific realization clawed its way into the Archon's mind. The humans weren't just defeating the Dominion, they were erasing them. And then a new message came through, broadcasted across every Dominion channel. The holographic display flickered, and then he appeared. Commander Elias Kane, the face of humanity's wrath. His expression was calm. Too calm. His cold, piercing gaze locked onto the Archon as he spoke in perfect Dominion standard. "This is your final moment, Supreme Archon." The room fell deathly silent. Kane continued, his voice steady, without emotion. "Your fleets are gone. Your defenses are crippled. Your empire is collapsing." A pause. Then, "And now, your species will suffer the same fate you forced upon others." The Supreme Archon stiffened, his claws curled into fists. No, you can't." Kane didn't even blink. "Your Dominion spent centuries erasing civilizations, burning their worlds, but you made one fatal mistake." The Archon snarled. "And what mistake was that?" Kane leaned forward, and when he spoke next, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You thought humanity was like them." Silence. "But we are not prey." The Archon's heart pounded in his chest. "We do not forgive." Outside, the skies of Dominion Prime darkened as Terran warships descended through the atmosphere, their hulls gleaming like obsidian death machines. "We do not negotiate." The first orbital kinetic strikes landed, entire city blocks vaporized in an instant, and we do not leave our enemies standing. The Archon watched in mute horror as explosions erupted across the capital, consuming buildings, monuments, and history in fire and dust. The Dominion was dying, and nothing could stop it now. The streets of the Dominion capital were a nightmare. Civilians screamed as the sky itself rained fire. Entire structures collapsed under the sheer weight of the human bombardment. Dominion warriors, once the proud enforcers of an empire that had ruled for centuries, fled like terrified animals. For the first time in history, the Dominion was the prey, and the hunters had come to end them. From the sky, drop pods began falling, metallic coffins crashing into the surface, slamming into the cracked streets with a force that shattered Duracrete. And then, from those pods, the soldiers of humanity emerged. Terran shock troopers clad in black adaptive armor, their faces hidden behind featureless helmets. They moved with precision, with purpose, their rifles raised as they marched forward without hesitation. The Dominion military tried to fight back. They failed. Human soldiers moved with terrifying efficiency, their weapons ripping through armor, through bodies, through anything that stood in their way. Tactical drones swarmed the streets, scanning, hunting, executing targets with mechanical precision. Dominion soldiers begged for mercy. None was given. Humanity had come for vengeance, and there was no room for pity. The Archon's war chamber was in ruins. Smoke choked the air, alarms blared, and his palace was collapsing around him. He had nowhere left to run. And then, the doors exploded inward. The Supreme Archon's remaining guards were dead in seconds, cut down by blindingly precise shots. And then, Kane entered. The human commander strode into the chamber with the same cold indifference as a god delivering judgment. His rifle was lowered but ready, his presence a silent promise of death. The Archon bared his fangs, hatred burning in his eyes. "You think this is justice?" he hissed. "This is genocide." Kane didn't flinch. "No." He raised his rifle, his voice calm. "This is balance." The Supreme Archon lunged forward in one final act of defiance. A single gunshot echoed. The Archon collapsed. His blood pooled across the ruins of his empire. His species' reign was over. Kane exhaled slowly, lowering his weapon. It was done. The Dominion, the once unstoppable empire that had ruled for centuries, was no more. Humanity had not just won. They had rewritten history. The Supreme Archon was dead. His lifeless body lay sprawled across the shattered ruins of his war chamber, his golden eyes frozen in a final expression of rage and disbelief. The Dominion was gone. And humanity had won. Commander Elias Kane stood over the Archon's corpse, his rifle still smoking from the single, final shot that had ended an empire. He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. It wasn't just another battle. It wasn't just another war. This was the moment the galaxy changed forever. "Sir, the capital has fallen." Lieutenant Mira Vasquez's voice came through his helmet's comms. Even through the static, he could hear the tension in her voice. "Remaining Dominion forces are surrendering en masse. Their entire military network has collapsed. What are your orders?" Kane's grip tightened around his weapon. This was the question that had lingered from the very beginning. What came next? For centuries, the Dominion had ruled with an iron grip, enslaving weaker species, exterminating resistance, and wiping civilizations from history. And now? They were the ones standing on the edge of extinction. Kane closed his eyes. This was not a mission of conquest. This was not about claiming new territory. This was a reckoning. He turned toward the shattered remains of the Archon's throne. Above them, the skies of Dominion Prime were choked with smoke, the once proud capital now reduced to ruins. The Dominion had burned countless worlds to ash. Now the flames had come for them. He activated his comms. "Status of remaining cities?" "Still in chaos," Vasquez replied. "Some of the Dominion's civilian population is trying to flee. Others are fighting to the death. They know what's coming." Kane stared at the burning skyline. The city was collapsing, massive skyscrapers toppling into the streets as explosions rippled across the surface. This wasn't just a defeat. This was an eradication. Kane tapped into the fleet-wide comms channel. "This is Commander Kane. Initiate full orbital bombardment." A long pause. Then Vasquez responded, "Are you sure, sir? There are still millions down there." Kane's expression was cold, unreadable. "They had their chance." A single confirmation tone echoed through his earpiece, and then the sky turned to fire. From orbit, the Terran fleet rained destruction upon what remained of Dominion Prime. Massive kinetic rods, each one the size of a skyscraper, fell from the heavens, striking with the force of 1,000 nuclear warheads. Entire continents collapsed, massive shockwaves ripping across the surface as the planet's crust shattered beneath the relentless bombardment. Cities vanished in an instant. The Dominion's people, those who had stood by while their empire burned worlds and exterminated entire species, now faced the same fate they had inflicted on others. There were no escape ships. There were no final pleas for mercy. There was only justice. And by the time the bombardment ended, Dominion Prime was nothing but a lifeless rock, its surface reduced to a burning wasteland, its oceans vaporized, its once great civilization now nothing more than dust and echoes. The Dominion had been erased, and the United Terran Navy had ensured that they would never rise again. The war was over, but the message had only just begun. Across the galaxy, civilizations watched in silent horror as the news spread. The Dominion, the ancient, all-powerful empire that had ruled for centuries, had been annihilated in a matter of days. The humans had come, and they had not just defeated their enemy. They had eradicated them. Now every empire, every federation, every minor faction looked to Earth with a single, unified realization. Do not provoke the Terran race, because if you do, there will be no peace talks, there will be no negotiations, there will only be fire and death. And once the Terran war machine is unleashed, it does not stop. On the bridge of the Behemoth, Kane stood in silence as he watched Dominion Prime's burning corpse through the viewscreen. The battle was over. The mission was complete. Humanity had made its mark on the galaxy, and the stars would never forget what had happened here. Vasquez approached. Her usual smirk was gone, replaced by something more serious. "What now, sir?" she asked. Kane didn't answer immediately, because deep down he knew. This was only the beginning. The Dominion had fallen, yes, but the galaxy was vast. There were other powers, other empires, other species who had watched what humanity had just done. Some would fear them, some would try to challenge them, and others, the smart ones, would understand the simple truth that had been written in fire across the Dominion's grave. Humanity was not to be crossed. Kane took a slow breath. We rebuild. He turned away from the burning world, his eyes now fixed on the stars beyond. And then we prepare for the next war. The Behemoth's engines roared to life, and as the massive warship turned away from the ruins of the Dominion, the future of the galaxy had already been decided. The age of the Dominion was over. The age of humanity had begun.